Typically, June tends to be a bit of a dry month when it comes to NFL related topics to talk about and discuss. So, as a result, that means I need to create some NFL related topics to talk about in this month. And what I'm going to do all throughout the month of June, starting here today in this video, is talk about the 5 greatest players in the history of all 32 teams in the National Football League today. That's the 5 greatest players in every organization. So if you're a fan of such and such team and such team, am I going to get to your team? Yes. When? It's going to be in alphabetical order. Very simple. So if you're a fan of the Redskins or the Titans, you're going to be waiting a while. But I'm going to get there, I promise you. So what I'll do in each of these videos is talk just maybe a little bit about the history of the organization as a whole, talk about some of those players that just missed the list and maybe why they're where they're at, and then talk about the 5 greatest players in the history of that organization in the order of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, in terms of how I'm measuring this, it's based off of greatness and dominance at their position compared to their peers during their time, how their legacy holds up over a period of time. Also, keep in mind, too, I'm only looking at their impact and performance and significance and meaning to the organization during their time with that organization. So if they played 8 great years with one organization, then 5 or 6 really good years with another organization, I'm only counting the statistical accomplishments and achievement and significant and meaning of that player during that time with said organization, not factoring in the entire body of work. Because again, it's about the 5 greatest players in each organization's history. Okay, in terms of like 100 greatest NFL players of all time, that's a video series coming down the pike. I promise you that. But that's not this video series. So I start off today with the Arizona Cardinals, an organization that has been around since the dawn of the National Football League. Played about 4 decades in Chicago as a Chicago Cardinals, then about 3 decades in St. Louis as the St. Louis Cardinals before in the late 80s making the move to Phoenix, to the Arizona area, and becoming what they are now, the Arizona Cardinals. And just because a team has been around for many, many years and has a long lineage and history does not necessarily make it a good lineage, a good history, and a good winning tradition. For the over 90 years that the now Arizona Cardinals have been in existence, going back to their days in St. Louis and before that Chicago, they have won a total of 2, and I count them again, 2 NFL championships. That was in 1925 and 1947. So the days of Patty Driscoll and Charlie Trippi have long since come and gone. Think about that. That is 67 years. Actually, I take that back. Yes, 67 years since the last time the Arizona Cardinals won an NFL or World Championship. Of course, they've got that NFC Championship from 2008 where they came this close to beating the Steelers in the Super Bowl, but not a long storied history or tradition of great Cardinals teams over the years. This has been a very snake-bitten franchise for a long, long time. However, that doesn't mean that they haven't had some great players in their organization's history. And I actually had some trouble piecing together this list, getting all 5 of them, because there were several guys that I could have put on the list that for different reasons I just didn't. Guys that I left off that deserve an honorable mention. Guys like Night Train Lane, guys like Charlie Trippi, guys like Jackie Smith, guys like Patty Driscoll, guys like Jim Hart, guys like Aeneas Williams, several of whom are actually enshrined in Canton in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But when I think of the Chicago / St. Louis / Arizona Cardinals, these are the 5 players that I think about the most, and ultimately the 5 players that are the greatest in the history of this organization, starting from 5 and then 4, 3, 2, and 1. Yeah, you like that. Let's get started. Number 5, Ollie Matson, the 3rd overall pick out of San Francisco in the 1952 NFL Draft. He was one of the premier all-purpose backs and return specialists of his time. He spent a total of 6 seasons with the Chicago Cardinals in the 1950s. And during that time, in 1952, he skipped a year because of military commitments with the Korean War and then came back for the 54 through 58 seasons. He made 6 appearances in the Pro Bowl and was 5 times voted a first-team All-Pro, either as a running back or return specialist. So every one of his 6 seasons that he spent with the Chicago Cardinals at the time, he was a Pro Bowler. In all but one of those seasons, he was a first-team All-Pro. He was retired, number 2 all-time in all-purpose yardage behind Jim Brown and number 1 all-time in most return touchdowns in a career. And he was also notably a first ballot Hall of Famer as a part of the 1972 Pro Football Hall of Fame induction class. That's number 5, Ollie Matson. Number 4, we go to more to modern times. Larry Fitzgerald, who's now going into his 11th season with the Arizona Cardinals, the third overall selection in that great 2004 draft out of Pittsburgh. All he's done during his decade in Arizona has been an 8-time Pro Bowler, a 1-time first team All Pro, have 6,000 plus yard receiving seasons, 4 seasons with 10 or more touchdown catches, and only all the while missing 4 games in his 10-year career with the Arizona Cardinals. When you think about the Arizona Cardinals in particular over the past decade, the first name I think unequivocally that you think of above all else is Larry Fitzgerald. He is Mr. Arizona Cardinal right now. He is the face of that franchise. He has been for a long period of time. And what's even more remarkable or spectacular to me about a Larry Fitzgerald is the fact that he has been as good as he's been, as dominant as he's been, as productive as he's been, for as long as he has been, without a whole lot of help around him for the majority of his career. This is a Larry Fitzgerald that hasn't had the great benefit of playing with a Pro Bowl or All-Pro caliber quarterback for years. Just imagine if a Larry Fitzgerald played with the likes of a Tom Brady, a Peyton Manning, a Drew Brees, an Aaron Rodgers, guys like that. Just imagine the type of numbers and type of resume that you would get from a Larry Fitzgerald. I think at the end of the day, when all is said and done, people will look at him being one of the best players at his position for over a decade now, being the face of a franchise like the Arizona Cardinals, and he will someday find his place in Canton as a Pro Football Hall of Fame member. Number 3, I go to Dan Deerdorf, the second round pick, number 43 overall in 1971 out of the University of Michigan. All he did during his 13 years in St. Louis with the Cardinals has become a 6-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time first team All Pro, not to mention the fact a 3-year in a row, 3 years running from 76, 77, 78, 3 times voted by the NFL Players Association as the best overall blocker in all of the National Football League. Just think about that for a second. 3 straight years at a time where you had lots of great offensive linemen. Dan Deerdorf for 3 straight years was viewed as the preeminent all-around blocker in all of the National Football League. Unfortunately, stuck on a couple of solid Cardinals teams of that time and a lot of bad Cardinals teams of that time, which is a sad thing you could say about so many great Cardinal players over the years. This is a guy that was a part of a line that 5 times led the NFC in fewest sacks allowed and 3 times led the entire NFL in the fewest sacks allowed. He was a 1996 inductee into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I know a lot of people think from his time working games for CBS or for Monday Night Football, but make no mistake about it. He might have looked dorky, but he didn't play dorky. He was a tremendous player and the greatest offensive lineman in the history of the Cardinals organization. Number 2, Roger Worley, the 19th overall selection in the first round out of Missouri in the 1969 NFL Draft. Good old number 22 finished his career after 14 years with the Cardinals in St. Louis as a 7-time Pro Bowler and a 3-time first-team All-Pro. He was a member of the 1970s NFL All-Decade Team, and finally in 2007, after so many years of being overlooked and shunned and kept out, became a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. Roger Worley, one of the more underrated defensive backs, and in particular one of the more underrated cornerbacks, I think, in the history of all of the National Football League. During his 14-year career, 7 times he was thought of well enough to become a Pro Bowler, 3 times a first-team All-Pro. Part of the 1970s NFL All-Decade Team. And again, like I said, a player that has his bust in Canton as a member of the 2007 induction class. But I think when it comes to the Chicago / St. Louis / Phoenix / Arizona Cardinals, there is one player that stands above the rest. There is one player that truly, to me, is the epitome of the Cardinals. He is the greatest player of the history of the Cardinals organization. He is the face, to me, still to this day, of the Cardinals organization. And in a lot of ways, he represents a lot of other great players in Cardinals history, too. Guys that were individually spectacular as part of a bad organization and some terrible teams. And of course, I'm talking about, as I would call him, the Rigby Rock, because he played like a rock sometimes. From good old Rigby, Idaho. The 74th overall selection in the 7th round out of Utah in the 1960 NFL draft, free safety Larry Wilson. All Larry Wilson did in his 13 years in the National Football League playing for the Arizona Cardinals as a free safety was go on to be thought of as one of the great safeties of all time, perhaps one of the great free safeties in NFL history, an 8-time Pro Bowler, a 5-time first team All Pro. And while he wasn't technically the inventor of it, which is a lie and a propaganda that's been put out there over the years, he was truly the first real master of the safety blitz and making it an integral weapon of defensive schemes that we still see utilized to this day. When you see a safety come into the box to blitz an opposing passer, you can thank Larry Wilson for that. He is still thought as the grandfather, the father, the daddy, the master of the safety blitz, who finished his career with 52 interceptions. He was a part of the 75th NFL anniversary team. Think about that. He was thought of well enough to be a part of 1994 of that 75th NFL anniversary team. He was also a first ballot Hall of Famer in 1978, which is an honor that a lot of, there aren't a ton of players in the Pro Football Hall of Fame to begin with. There are even fewer players that are actually first ballot Hall of Famers. And in that time, it was really difficult to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but Larry Wilson was that well respected by players and by media, what have you, to be enshrined as a first ballot inductee into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And one of the things I think that really truly stands out above the rest and what makes Larry Wilson Mr. Cardinal above anybody else, whether that's Worley or Deerdorf or Fitzgerald or Ollie Matson or Night Train Lane or Jim Hart or Jackie Smith and Charlie Trippi and Aeneas Williams, is Larry Wilson is one of 5 players in Cardinals history and the only player as part of this top 5 list to have his number retired by the organization. That happened for a reason, because at the end of the day, the greatness of true greatness when it comes to Chicago / St. Louis / Phoenix / Arizona Cardinals, to me, is perfectly embodied by one of the great free safeties in the history of the National Football League, Larry Wilson. And that's why I feel he is the greatest Cardinal in the organization's history. Now, you can let me know what you think down in the comment section below. The next team up will be the Atlanta Falcons, and I'll be doing this all month, all 32 teams, the 5 greatest players in the history of every NFL team's history.